Hello and welcome to Focus on Liberia. I am Anthony, your presenter. Today we are throwing the focus on the Diaspora Development Fund Act of 2025 and the 8 reasons presented by Telvina Cole in a formal position paper arguing that this bill, as currently written, must be rejected. Production disclaimer. This broadcast was produced at the request of the author, Telvina Cole, as a commissioned editorial by Focus on Liberia. The views, arguments, and recommendations contained herein reflect the position of Telvina Cole exclusively. Focus on Liberia has produced this content in good faith as part of its commitment to amplifying informed public discourse on matters of national significance. Now back to the broadcast. Telvina Cole opens her paper with a concession that is important to state clearly. The Diaspora Development Fund Act has, in her words, a legitimate and worthy goal: channeling Liberian diaspora resources towards sustainable national development. That goal, Telvina Cole writes, deserves serious support. However, the bill, as currently drafted, contains what she describes as fundamental structural deficiencies, legal contradictions, accountability vacuums, enforcement gaps, and governance failures that make it unfit for passage in its current form. Telvina Cole is explicit on this point. The 8 reasons she presents are not a rejection of the fund's purpose. They are, in her words, a rejection of the current bill's design and a call for a substantive redraft that builds systems of accountability rather than asking the diaspora to trust individuals. She closes her overview with a statement that frames the entire paper: the diaspora deserves a bill that earns its trust, not one that assumes it. The first reason Telvina Cole presents is this: no diaspora consent was ever sought. In her words, you are being financially committed to a structure you never approved. The bill mandates automatic deductions from every remittance transaction and claims to represent the broad Liberian diaspora without a formal vote, referendum, or any documented consent process. Thousands of Liberians sending money home to support families, Telvina Cole writes, never agreed to fund a structure they had no role in designing. Calling this a voluntary contribution while making it mandatory on every transaction, she argues, is not representation. It is an assumption. Telvina Cole is firm on the standard. Any legitimate diaspora financing mechanism must begin with a documented mandate from the people it claims to speak for. Without that, the fund lacks moral authority regardless of its legal standing. The second reason Telvina Cole raises is equally foundational. Your money, she writes, is controlled by an unaccountable private organization. The bill names DLDI as the beneficial owner of every dollar collected, yet the bill never legally defines what DLDI is, how its leadership is elected, who can remove them, or what regulatory body oversees them. DLDI, Telvina Cole notes, is not a government agency, a licensed financial institution, or a formally chartered nonprofit under this bill. No Liberian regulator, she writes, not the Central Bank of Liberia, not the Ministry of Finance, not the Liberia Anti-Corruption Commission, has standing to examine or sanction DLDY's internal operations unless DLDI itself triggers a complaint. You are being asked, Telvina Cole concludes, to permanently fund an organization that exists legally outside any accountability framework. The third reason Telvina Cole presents is structural and specific. 3 people, she writes, control all disbursements with no independent check. Every payment from the fund requires joint authorization from the DLDI president, the treasurer, and the DLDB chairman, all 3 drawn from the same leadership structure. The Central Bank of Liberia, which physically holds the money, is explicitly wired to execute payments automatically upon receiving written instructions. Telvina Cole identifies the critical gap. The CBL cannot refuse, delay, or escalate a disbursement no matter how suspicious it looks. There is no external co-signatory, no threshold above which additional approvals are required, and no emergency freeze mechanism. If those 3 individuals collude, act in bad faith, or are simultaneously compromised, Telvina Cole writes, there is nothing in this bill to stop it. The fourth reason Telvina Cole presents cuts to the legal coherence of the bill itself. The voluntary label, she argues, is a legal fiction. Section 1(b)(7) defines the patriotic trust as a voluntary diaspora trust contribution. Section 3(a) mandates the $1 deduction on every single remittance transaction, regardless of the sender's wishes. These two provisions, Telvina Cole states plainly, cannot legally coexist. A Liberian court or any foreign court asked to enforce compliance by an international money transfer operator could use that contradiction to invalidate the deduction mechanism entirely. Diaspora members could find themselves having contributed for years to a fund whose legal basis has been struck down. A development fund built on a contradictory legal foundation, Telvina Cole concludes, is not a fund. It is a liability. The fifth reason Telvina Cole raises is jurisdictional. The bill, she writes, cannot be enforced where most Liberians live. The majority of Liberian remittances originate from the United States, the European Union, and the United Kingdom, jurisdictions where Liberia has no power to compel compliance. Financial institutions in those countries are regulated by their own governments and must comply with consumer consent requirements, anti-money laundering standards, and remittance regulations that directly conflict with mandatory per-transaction deductions imposed by Liberian legislation. Without bilateral agreements, regulatory approvals, or treaty frameworks, none of which this bill establishes, the deduction mechanism, Telvina Cole concludes, is legally unworkable internationally and could expose participating institutions to liability in their home jurisdictions. The sixth reason Telvina Cole presents is a governance indictment. Weak governance, she writes, creates conditions for corruption and mission drift, and good intentions do not substitute for structural accountability. The bill contains no meaningful procurement controls, no anti-corruption safeguards written into law, no whistleblower protection framework, no public vote on project priorities, and no mechanism for ordinary diaspora members to recall leadership. The Joint Oversight Committee is explicitly limited to advisory capacity. It cannot compel the production of documents, freeze funds, or refer matters to prosecutors. The auditor, Telvina Cole notes, is selected by the very organization being audited. Any institution managing potentially millions of dollars annually under these conditions, she writes, creates a predictable long-term risk of favoritism, political manipulation, corruption, and mission drift, regardless of the original intent or character of the founding leadership. Systems fail, Telvina Cole concludes. This bill builds no system. The seventh reason Telvina Cole raises is one of strategic self-defeat. The government, she writes, is treated as an enemy rather than a partner, and a bill hostile to the government it needs cannot pass or succeed. Section 7 bars the government of Liberia from any involvement in the fund and invokes criminal economic sabotage statutes against any official who attempts to access it. While Telvina Cole acknowledges that protecting diaspora funds from political capture is a legitimate goal, she argues that this adversarial design makes the bill nearly impossible to pass through the legislature, alienates the local implementation partners needed to build schools, clinics, and roads, and forecloses co-financing arrangements with government ministries that could multiply the fund's impact many times over. A bill structurally hostile to the government it depends on for implementation, she concludes, is strategically self-defeating, and even if passed, it would operate in permanent conflict with the institutions required to execute its own projects. The eighth and final reason Telvina Cole presents speaks directly to the most economically vulnerable members of the diaspora. The flat deduction, she writes, disproportionately harms the most vulnerable senders. A $10 sender loses 10% of their transfer. A $500 sender loses 0.2%. A flat $1 deduction per transaction, regardless of size, is regressive by design. The diaspora members most likely to send small, frequent transfers, Telvina Cole writes, are also the most economically vulnerable. Workers, students, and low-income earners sending money for school fees, medical bills, and food. The bill contains neither a minimum transaction exemption nor an income-based adjustment. Beyond the fairness issue, she adds, a per-transaction fee that feels punishing to small senders creates a direct incentive to shift to informal transfer channels, hawala networks, and hand-carried cash, which would reduce overall remittance transparency and could ultimately decrease overall financial flows into Liberia. The bill's revenue mechanism, Telvina Cole concludes, works against the very community it claims to serve. A fair assessment, Telvina Cole writes, requires acknowledging what the bill gets right. The prohibition on government access to the fund is an appropriate protection against political capture of diaspora resources. The requirement for annual independent audits establishes a transparency baseline, one that needs to be strengthened, not removed. The equitable county distribution requirement reflects a commitment to inclusive development across all 15 counties. And the broad scope of permitted uses, covering education, healthcare, infrastructure, agriculture, and technology, is appropriately flexible for a long-term development mechanism. For a revised draft to earn diaspora support, Telvina Cole identifies 8 minimum requirements. First, conduct a formal diaspora consent process before the bill is submitted. Second, define DLDI's legal structure in the bill itself, covering its charter, election procedures, member eligibility, removal process, and financial reporting obligations. Third, resolve the voluntary and mandatory contradiction by either removing the voluntary characterization or restructuring the deduction as a genuine opt-in mechanism. Fourth, give the Central Bank of Liberia real gatekeeping authority, including the power to flag, delay, or escalate irregular disbursements independent of DLDI direction. Fifth, fix auditor independence so that the DLDB majority, not DLDI leadership, selects the auditor with mandatory 5-year rotation. Sixth, add a minimum transaction exemption to protect low-income senders and reduce the incentive to use informal transfer channels. Seventh, give the Joint Oversight Committee Enforcement Authority at a minimum the power to refer credible concerns directly to the Liberia Anti-Corruption Commission without routing through the central bank first. And eighth, establish a path to government partnership, not permanent adversarial exclusion, through a co-investment framework that protects fund independence while enabling implementation collaboration. Telvina Cole closes her paper with these words: "The diaspora's financial contributions to Liberia represent decades of sacrifice and solidarity. A fund that channels those resources toward national development is worth fighting for. This bill, as written, is not yet that fund. Rejection now, paired with a commitment to principled redrafting, is the path most likely to produce a mechanism the diaspora can trust and Liberia can benefit from for generations." Now, my own take before we close. Telvina Cole has done something rare and necessary. She has not simply criticized, she has diagnosed. There is a difference between someone who tears down and someone who dissects, and what this position paper represents is the kind of rigorous, structured analysis that Liberian public discourse needs more of, not less. The diaspora sends home hundreds of millions of dollars every year. That flow of resources is built on love, on sacrifice, and on hope. Any mechanism that seeks to formalize and direct that flow carries an enormous moral weight. An enormous moral weight demands an equally rigorous institutional foundation. What Telvina Cole is saying, in plain terms, is that good intentions do not build accountability. Structures do, laws do, checks and balances do. A fund that collects the diaspora's money without earning the diaspora's consent is not a development tool. It is an extraction mechanism with a nationalistic coat of paint. Liberia has seen too many of those. Reject this bill as written. Demand the redraft. And when the redraft comes, hold it to the same standard Telvina Cole has set here. Thorough and robust journalism anchored in nationalism for sustainable development is what drives our reporting. We report to inform and analyze to empower. Join us every day for nothing but the truth. Thank you for watching. The truth needs a vehicle, and you are that vehicle. Share this. For Focus on Liberia, I'm Ansoni.